Hello! So today I'm going to be talking about Endling by Maria Reva. It's booker season, baby. Firstly, I would just like to say I'm sorry. Normally, I think of some fun, creative way of doing a sort of booker predictions list. But life's been too mad. It's been too mad. I've been too busy. I have not had any time to film anything. I've been reading. I've been smashing through books like you wouldn't believe. But, yeah, just no time to record. However, have no fear because I do intend to read the entirety of the Booker Longlist and do a review for every single book on that list. Now, I have only read one book from the Booker Longlist, and that is Audition. I read it absolutely ages ago, but again, with work, I just didn't have time to film a review. But I do still have all my notes from when I was reading it, so I will do a review of that book at some point. It just won't be as fresh in my mind, so there might be some things that I'm just not quite as on top of as I could have been. So I decided to embark on my Booker Longlist journey. It's always tricky knowing which book I'm going to pick first, but from all of them, from the entire list, there was one that stood out that honestly, from just reading the blurb, I was a bit like, yeah, this is a me book through and through, and that was Endling. And for those of you who are familiar with Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, I chose wisely. So Maria Reva was born in the Ukraine and grew up in Canada. She first got noticed for her short story collections Good Citizens Need Not Fear, which is based all around Soviet Ukraine family histories. I haven't read that short story collection, by the way, this is just pure Google Times. And Endling is her debut novel. Let's get into some of those tasty themes. We're looking at extinction and mourning. We have a general satire of marriage tourism, the patriarchy and capitalism. The novel is looking at war and trauma. The novel is also a little bit metafictional. This one's a quirky, interesting one in that way. And finally, I would say threaded throughout the entirety of this novel is this kind of like humour as resistance thing, you know, in the face of all this adversity, finding the humour within it. So let's look into the characters. And apologies if I mispronounce any of the names. First up, we have Yeva, who is a very eccentric sort of biologist living in the Ukraine. Her aims are to rescue snails and breed them. And she funds all of her research through taking part in romance tour gigs. And she has this kind of sort of camper van, this RV that has her lab in it, and she sort of travels around in that. Next up, we have Nastia, who is an activist. Her mother was an activist, she's an activist, her sister is an activist, and she is, from what the book describes, very beautiful, very attractive. So she is trying to take down the sort of marriage tourism industry, just like her mum was trying to do. And so she is actively trying to infiltrate the kind of marriage tourism gig. Nastia and her sister are both searching for their lost mother, and they think by infiltrating this sort of marriage tourism gig, kidnapping a load of bachelors and holding them for ransom, they might be able to find the whereabouts of their mother. Next up is Sol, who is Nastia's sister, and she is her translator. Within the marriage tourism realm, every couple must have a translator, even though a lot of the women who are taking part, who are within it, can speak English. The sort of rules are there must always be a translator. So Sol is sort of like stepping in as her sister's translator when they go on dates. And what happens next is Yeva, Nastia and Sol, they band together because the two sisters, they need somewhere to keep their sort of kidnapped bachelors. And obviously Yeva, she has this RV which has a lab in it that has just about enough space to fit the kidnapped bachelors. Next up we have Pasha, who is a Ukrainian-born but grew up in Canadian man who has joined the sort of the marriage tourism. He's trying to find himself a Ukrainian wife. He's looking for love, he's looking for romance, and mainly because growing up in Canada, he's had this strange sort of affinity for the Ukraine. He's grown up in Canada and his family moved there. They tried to become Canadian. They didn't speak Russian or Ukraine anymore. And he's grown up, but he's seen all of his friends who stayed in Ukraine, strangely, thriving. And he, in Canada, because it's so expensive, is struggling to do anything. Career-wise, get a house. Even though he's a very smart man, he's just struggling. So his sort of motivations are to go back to the Ukraine, find himself a Ukrainian wife, and hopefully sort of start a life there. And of course, he ends up being kidnapped by the sisters and joining the plot within that sort of road trip moment. And finally, the last final character I'm going to talk about is Lefty the snail, who is the last snail of their existence. And I'm not really going to say much more than that, but Lefty the Snail, what a ledge. Right, so I'm going to leave that there because I'm already skirting on the edges of spoiler territory already. But that is the setup of this novel. That is the first act, I should say, of this novel before it sort of goes off. And it's quirky. It's really quirky. I suppose I've already mentioned these sort of metafictional elements. So actually, I don't think it's spoiling it if I say now that the author themselves, Maria, actually has sections within this book talking about her own experiences. I think what's really interesting about this novel is being able to hear her talk about her life, her situation, and how different elements of what she's been through apply to each of the different characters throughout this journey, especially sort of Pasha in moments. But yeah, so this novel, it twists and it turns, and there are lots of things that I would like to talk about sort of spoiler-wise, which I will, but I think I'm going to leave that there. I think I'm already at the edge of sort of ruining the sort of experience of going into this novel and just sort of like the different sort of turns coming. I wouldn't say they're twists, it's just structurally really interesting, but I really love what it's doing structurally and what it kind of does to push what the novel is trying to do. Yeah, really good. Okay, so this is your moment. I'm going to put a timestamp up on the screen. That's when I would have stopped talking about spoiler stuff and I would have gone straight into my likes and dislikes. So yeah, just skip to there if you don't want to hear any of these spoilery bits. Okay, so spoiler territory. So what I found really fascinating is we have a very conventional narrative at play, especially in Act 1 of this novel as we're moving through it. And then all of a sudden, the author interjects into the novel and starts talking. And then all of a sudden in Act 2, Russia invades Ukraine. And this disruption of the country is also a complete disruption of the narrative forms in which we thought we were following. You think you're following the sort of book in a certain way. You think you kind of got the build up. It's very quirky. It's very funny. It's really smart. It's really well written. And then, yeah, this sort of invasion disrupts not just the characters in the story, but also the narrative that's at play and the sort of structure of the novel that we're following. And I thought that was really, really, really smart. There's also a chapter that keeps repeating itself. Chapter 44, I think, but don't quote me on that, I can't remember. And it's almost like it's the author revising and rewriting these different moments and interactions with her grandfather, then playing it through the lens of the characters. And it's just a really interesting way to play with form, to experiment with the sort of the journey that the narrator's going on. And I just loved it. I mean, I like experimental fiction, but in this instance, the blend works so well. For some people, it might not work. It might be too jarring what's taking place. They might be enjoying the sort of conventional narrative in Act 1 too much. But yeah, I just sort of loved it for it. Big thumbs up from me. Okay, so what did I like and what didn't I like? What I liked. Well, firstly, I just love the originality of this novel and its structuring. Now, some people could say it's quite gimmicky, but I only think it's gimmicky if it's not properly serving what the novel, what the book, what the author is trying to say. And in this instance, something that starts off as a quirky sort of caper and then in the second half sort of diverts into something totally different only serves what the author is trying to say, and I thought that was great. Next up, and it just sort of plays into what I've said, but the inventive structure, the sort of fragmentary timeline, all of those things worked really, really well for me. Next thing I really loved is the satire that is threaded throughout this novel. I don't think you can get away with a novel like this without injecting it with that really dark humour and that satire, and it just was balanced perfectly for me. Next thing I really liked, and I think it is a bit, I don't know whether it's on the nose, but the idea of like the snails and the extinction and how that plays into the metaphors of what the novel is trying to say, and these sort of small acts of resistance and the sort of like the slow nature of snails, everything within it, I thought balanced. I thought it was a really good narrative thread and I thought it worked really well. The next thing I really loved about this novel is the sort of ethics around the author questioning writing about something when you're so far away from it. Feeling like you belong within it, but you're so far away from it, and writing about it and having the right to write about it, I found really, really interesting. It's probably one of the reasons that this has ended up on the book of Longlist, because it's actually a really smart reflection into that idea of writing about trauma and writing about war and things like this, but also that guilt behind doing so when you're not within it. I found that really really well balanced and really interesting. The next thing I really enjoyed about this novel is the pacing and the writing. It just flows really, really well, and it just keeps moving and moving. Even when it shifts and changes, I feel like the balance and the change in the language was handled really, really well. And finally, what I really loved about this novel is what it's doing thematically. There are so many themes taking place within here about grief, remorse, mourning, but also ultimately hope. And I think the way this novel makes you feel, it has got hope in its bones. There is hope on its pages, which leaves you, even though I'm not going to talk about the ending, but yeah, I feel like it's overall a pretty hopeful novel. Hopeful in the act of writing, I think. Hopeful in, God, it's hard to talk about without spoiling too much, but hopefully you get what I mean. What didn't I like? Only two, and I would say very small things. The first being the kidnapped bachelors. So I understand why they're caricatures, because they're playing into this sort of satire, a stereotype of America and American values and American needs. But for me, they were too caricatures. There was zero depth to any of the kind of bachelors who have been kidnapped. And I absolutely understand why Maria is sort of going in this route with sort of like how she painted them to make them look and to make them feel, so they very much sort of ticked a box, but it was too heavy-handed for me, way too heavy-handed, and they just turned into something that didn't feel real, and they didn't work for me. So there you go. Understand why they were written the way they were, and they do play into the satire, but just didn't work for me overall. And my final dislike is, and this won't matter to everyone, it just sort of matters to me because it's a personal dislike, is that some plot threads are a little bit too loose or unresolved. I don't mind a loose plot thread too much, but something that's just unresolved makes me feel like, well, why set it up in the first place? I don't mind something being a little bit loose, being introduced and not quite sort of tying off beautifully. But yeah, something that just goes unresolved, I'm just a little bit like, but why? That feels a little bit like you've wasted my time. But there you go, that's it for my likes and dislikes. Overall, I thought Endling was excellent. Just excellent, and in some moments just fantastic. Stylistically, I always love something that's experimental in what it's doing stylistically and with its structure, especially when it serves the plot, the story, and what the novel was trying to say. And in Endling, it does all of those things. This is thematically rich. I laughed so much. It sidestepped me. I couldn't predict it. But yet everything always served what it was trying to say. That idea of small acts of resistance, of writing, fiction writing being an act of kind of resistance, especially in a country that's in a time of crisis. I thought all of these things were just brilliantly done. So I'm going for it's 4.5 to 5 stars for me. I'm going to end up probably on 4.5 because, again, the way the Bachelors were written just felt a little bit lazy to me, for me to ever really hit the kind of like 5-star, masterpiece sort of area. But this is an excellent novel. For me, 4.5 stars out of 5. I really loved it. So, have you read Endling? And if you have, what did you think about it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Please let me know in the comments below. I'm really excited that I've got cracking on the old book of Longlist journey. And I'm just going to keep churning them out. Hopefully, I will get all of them done. Obviously, that one novel, the big chunky novel, I can't remember what it's called now. It's not released until after the shortlist is announced, and if it's not on the shortlist, I'm not going to read it. I'm not that type of completionist. It just frustrates me when they do that. So I'm just going to read what's available before the shortlist is announced, and then do my own personal prediction for what I think should or might make the shortlist. Right, thanks very much for watching, everybody. I hope you're well. I hope you're enjoying whatever you might be reading, and I'll see you all on the next one.